Hi, for those of you I haven't met before, I'm Michelle, and this video is about zooming in so that you can identify what your pelvic floor exercises are going to feel like when you're doing them at home. The key concept of pelvic floor rehabilitation is always going to start with performing the contraction correctly and being able to relax it effectively. By looking at images and videos, you're giving your nervous system the information it needs to be able to discriminate between your pelvic floor muscles, and what each of them are doing. Jade, Anne and I will have given you links to videos and images that we think will fit your needs specifically, but our other clients have also shared with us images and videos that they have found helpful. Imagery is more powerful when you can connect it with biofeedback. Biofeedback is the strategy of using the sensations in your body to guide and evaluate how well the muscle action matches what the imagery is telling you to do. So specifically today, we're doing a pressure biofeedback activity. So following this activity will help you to identify the bony parts of your pelvis, as well as where the urethra, the vagina, and the back passage sit in the bony pelvis, so that you can start to recognize what happens to these structures when the muscles contract and when they relax. The activity that we'll be doing takes about 10 minutes to complete, but when you work with it daily, you may find that because you're becoming more skillful at zooming in more easily, that it'll only take you about 5 minutes to do as a warm-up to doing your home exercise programs. A gentle reminder about language. It is important to remember that pelvic floor muscles are part of the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is a structure like the urethra, the vagina, the anal canal. The pelvic floor can change its position, just like the vagina can change its position, the urethra can change its position. The pelvic floor muscles sit within the pelvic floor. So in the descriptions that we use, try and listen closely. Are we saying pelvic floor, or are we saying PFMs, the pelvic floor muscles? Ideally, the pelvic floor muscles, the PFMs, are what contract and relax voluntarily as part of your exercise, but ideally their muscle contractions and relaxations become automatically tailored to suit what you're doing. Just like your calf muscles contract and relax as you're walking without you telling them what to do. We want your pelvic floor muscles to be contracting and relaxing to suit what you're doing during the day. So let's jump into the activity now with Jade being our model, and I'll talk you through it. Okay, so for this biofeedback activity, we're going to use pressure that is created by having a bolster to sit against. So we've got this roll of Tubi Grip as our bolster, but you could make one up at home by rolling up a towel, putting some tape around it, maybe a sock around it to help it hold its shape. The bolster is going to be something that you sit on like you're sitting on a saddle. Okay, the bolster needs to feel comfortable when it is against your body. So this bolster might be a good size for Jade, but yours might need to be smaller or larger. That's something that with your physio you might be able to work out. If you have any difficulties, just raise it with us when we're in the clinic. Okay, so Jade's now sitting on the bolster, and she's got it positioned so that some of the bolster is to the front of her pelvis. So here's her pelvis. I've got a smaller bolster here for illustration. So if I turn side on, Jade's got the bolster sitting so it projects to the front as well as to the back, and it's either side of her sit bones. So the first movement we're going to do is a tipping of the pelvis side to side. So Jade's going to shift her weight across her pelvis side to side, and as she does so, she is feeling for the pressure that her sit bones make against the bolster. So as she presses down on one side, that sit bone will feel like it's pressing firmer against the bolster. So this is a chance for your nervous system to pay attention to that pressure change through the sit bones on each side. Jade started her movement zoomed out. So her whole trunk is going side to side, but we're now going to zoom into the pelvis. So I'm going to hold Jade's shoulders steady, and Jade is going to continue to shift her pelvis side to side so that the movement is happening in the pelvis only. And if I take my hands to Jade's pelvis, then she keeps her shoulders steady, but she moves her pelvis side to side, feeling for the pressure of the sit bones against the bolster. So I place my hands around Jade's pelvis, so just to draw your attention on the video, but it's also something that you might do with your own body, is that you're using your hands to guide the movement to happen at your pelvis rather than your whole body. So we're zooming into the movement of the pelvis, rocking side to side over the bolster. Okay, so the next pattern of movement we're going to look at is the tipping of the pelvis forwards and backwards. And this helps the bony parts of the pubic bone at the front of the pelvis contact the bolster when we tip forward, and the tailbone of the pelvis contacts the bolster when we tip back. So starting that movement with Jade, she's going to lean forward to feel her pubic bone come down firm on the bolster. Then she's going to roll back and slump to sit her tailbone down against the bolster at the back. So just going through that pattern again, Jade. And again, at the moment, Jade's zoomed out from her pelvis. We're going to now zoom in. She's going to bring her shoulders over the pelvis itself, and she's going to tip her pelvis forward to find the pubic bone on the bolster and roll the pelvis back to slump the tailbone. So we've zoomed in to the pelvis moving on its own. Our third pattern of movement is called the pivot of the pelvis, where the pelvis is going to turn, pivoting on the bolster. The easiest way for that to be a movement you create is if you have your hands on your knees. We'll need to look at Jade now. And then you press forward through, so shoulders stay there, but you glide forward through the leg and then back through the leg. So this pivoting movement is a turn of the pelvis. So one part of the pelvis moves back, the opposite side moves forward. So whilst we're looking closely at one leg, the equal and opposite reaction is happening on the other side. So if we look back at what's happening to the body as a whole, it's as though the trunk is rotating on a pivoting pelvis. So once you get comfortable with that movement, then zoom in, shoulders stay steady, and the movement continues at the pelvis alone. This is not a big movement because it's the movement of the pelvis below the spine, and this lower end of the spinal column doesn't have a lot of rotation in it. So Jade now is run through the movements, and we'll take you through the actual activity now. So the first part of the activity is to do the side-to-side rocking. And as Jade does this rocking, she will be feeling the pressure of her sit bones against the bolster, becoming heavier on one side as she shifts to that side, lighter on the other. As she's doing that, I want her to take out a mental tape measure and think about how far apart are these sit bones. And then come back to rest evenly. The next pattern of movement we're going to explore, get Jade to do, is the tipping forwards and tipping back. So she's on her sit bones and she tips forward to feel her pubic bone against the bolster, Then she just comes back to her sit bones. Sit bones, tip forward to pubic bone, tip back to sit bones. So that we're now getting the brain to plot out those pressure points between the pressure point of the pubic bone when tipped forward, the pressure on the sit bones when we're sitting back, with the pressure being equal on left and right sit bones. Forward and back. We're going to make it multi-directional now. So when Jade is sitting on her sit bones, I want her to move firmer on one side, so tip to one side, tip to the other, come back to centre, tip forward to the pubic bone, tip back to the sit bones, then left sit bone, right sit bone, centre pubic bone. Asking the brain to picture how these 3 points of pressure will mark out a triangle shape. And in that triangle shape is where you will find part of the pelvic floor. And within it, pelvic floor muscles. So take that mental tape measure, Jade, and I want you to stay balanced as you are, no further movement, but just picture what's the distance between my sit bones. Tip your weight onto the pubic bone and just check in what's happened at the sit bones. The weight on the sit bones will have eased and there'll be more pressure on the pubic bone. What's the distance between the left sit bone and the pubic bone? What's the distance between the pubic bone and the right sit bone? What about right sit bone to left sit bone? So we're mapping out that triangle. And then come back to your sit bones. So now we're going to get Jade to focus on building a picture for the other half of the pelvic floor, the triangle formed between the sit bones and the coccyx. So, rocking side to side, just finding those sit bones once more, Jade, tuning them in, and then sitting in a balanced way so it's even between left and right sit bones. That pressure feels even. Then I want you to tip the pelvis back, so slumping down onto the tailbone and then coming back up onto your sit bones. Tipping back down onto the tailbone and back onto the sit bones. Get out your tape measure, tune in once more the distance between left and right sit bones, and then tip back onto your tailbone, taking your tape measure from the right sit bone to the tailbone. Then tape measure comes back, we come up onto our sit bones once more, and the tape measure folds back. Tip onto the coccyx, take your tape measure from right sit bone to coccyx, and then as you come back up to your sit bones, the tape measure retracts. Let's take our tape measure now to the coccyx, and we're going to tip onto the coccyx, tape measure closed. Sorry, tape measure is there. Then we're coming up onto our sit bones, opening the tape measure back to the left sit bone. Then the left sit bone, drop back onto the coccyx. Again, using your tape measure to plot the distance between the coccyx and the left sit bone. We're going to go all the way around the triangle now. So starting with our weight balanced with equal pressure on the left and right sit bones. That's it. Retune if you need with movement. Good. And then from there, we're dropping down onto the tailbone, up to the sit bones, picturing that triangle that we've mapped out. And that's the back triangle. Okay, so now we're going to put our two triangles together to make a diamond, so that we have a diamond of bony pressure points to guide us to zoom in on the pelvic floor. So we zoomed from trunk to pelvis, and at triangles and diamonds, we're zooming into the pelvic floor itself. So starting with your weight evenly balanced on your left and right sit bones, Jade, and feel free to have a wriggle whenever you need in this activity, because you can see Jade's using a lot of concentration. And balance there. Okay, so we're going to slump down to the tailbone or to the back end of our diamond. So that's one triangle. We come back to our sit bones, and then we tip forward onto the front end triangle, landing on the pubic bone. Back to the sit bones, so we're at the wide part of the triangle, and then we're going to drop into the tailbone to the bottom point of the triangle. Up to the sit bones, and then forward onto the pubic bone takes us to the top of the triangle. So whilst we give Jade a couple of minutes to have a break, I just wanted to then tell you a little bit more about the triangles. So when you are picturing the front triangle between the pubic bone and the sit bones, if these are my sit bones, there's the pubic bone, and my thumbs are running across between the sit bones, then in that space towards the peak of this triangle at the pubic bone, that's where the urethral opening is sitting. Okay? So as well as picturing the boundaries of this pelvis and knowing what's in this space, you've got pelvic floor muscles, and the urethra. You've also got between the sit bones, is just in front of the sit bones, is where you've got the vaginal opening. So you've got two openings sitting in this triangle, the urethra towards the front behind the pubic bone, and the vagina in front of the sit bones. If we then turn our triangle to the other side and flip it to the tailbone, in this triangle, the opening you have is the anus. At the position of the sit bones themselves, that's where you find your perineum. And your perineum is that space of tissue and skin and muscle and pelvic floor that bridges between the sit bones and is the barrier between the vagina and the anus. So that, I hope, will be a helpful support for you when you're working on your exercises at home, when we talk about an activity to help you zoom in so that you can use biofeedback, the pressure of your bony pelvis, images that your mind can link to different parts of your pelvis, so that you're able to follow your exercise instructions more confidently. One of the things I'd just like to finish with is we've done the activity sitting on a bolster like this pelvis is now. The interesting thing about the nervous system is that when you take that bolster away, for the next few minutes, your brain's going to be really attentive to say, where did that pressure go? So it's another point in time where the brain is really zoomed in because you've created a change. So take your bolster out, run through each movement, run through each activity again, so that you're again building the recognition you need, whether the bolster's there or not. You may also have noticed that in the video I was sitting on a gym ball, and I find it very hard to talk about something and not do it at the same time. And so you would have also seen that these movements can be done on a gym ball to add extra attention to the pelvic parts, and also maybe some comfort. Your physio will discuss directly with you whether or not this is something that's recommended for where you are at this time in your rehabilitation.